Hi, Nick Veach here. Today I want to take a look at David E. Stannard's book, American Holocaust. It basically deals with the conquest of the New World, as he puts it. But his team seem to be extremely one-sided, and I believe he has designs upon the reader which are sinister, to put it mildly. Today we're going to take a look at his claims regarding cannibalism, which I think do not stand scrutiny whatsoever. As we skim through the book, we come across a couple of people that the author gave thanks to. One is Florence Evelyn Harwood Stannard, personally that's dude's mom, and also Hanoni K. Trask, and they are tellingly the poet who gave me life and taught me that in kindness and charity there is strength, and the poet who sustains me and is unwavering in the struggle for justice. I can't imagine thanking poets if I'm writing a book for giving me inspiration or whatever else. It just seems incredibly unlikely. Before I dabbled with writing in prose, I dabbled with poetry, and I lasted about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, because poetry is so goddamn easy. Just writing in rhyming couplets or in blank verse. The problem with poetry is that A, it's easy, B, it's extremely limiting because you have to get out what you're thinking within a very kind of confined structure. It's really ultimately unfulfilling. But an easy way to look at it is like, imagine if you had to express yourself in rap. Boom, shaka boom, baka boom, ba boom, boom. You can call me the man, but just don't call me Stan. I really rock, but I ain't so chock-a-block. I mean, I'm just making up total idiotic gibberish. But can you imagine trying to express yourself in rap lyrics instead of using prose or writing out your thoughts and subject verb object without any constraints. And you can use any sentence structure you want to use, any kind of verbiage, any language, whatever. As opposed to something has to rhyme. So you got to not only express yourself, but you got to figure out how you're going to end each sentence. So you can't really concentrate on your expression. You have to kind of divvy up 50% is of what you want to say, 50% is how you're going to say it. That's going to mean you're just totally dumbing down what you're saying. I mean, it's ridiculous. So again, to me, this is indicative. I might normally not point this out, but this guy's book really is awful. And the fact that he would thank poets just suggests to me this guy is so emotional. And it's just indicative, anyway, that he would go to poets for when he comes to expressing his gratitude for the people who inspired him. Oh yeah, I should mention the reason I got cranky was because I came across this dude, William Carlos Williams. In the beginning of the book, you've also got this quote: "The main islands were thickly populated with a peaceful folk when Christ overfound them. But the orgy of blood which followed, no man has written. We are the slaughterers. It is the tortured soul of our world." Well, I didn't do any slaughtering. Did you do any slaughtering, Mr. William Carlos Williams? If you did, you're perfectly welcome to turn yourself into the police, make an admission, confess. I didn't do any slaughtering. Thank you very much, because I don't have a tortured soul. But thanks for trying. I mean, this is a game, and this is part of what I think Stannard is all about anyway, too. That's why he likes this quote. We are the slaughterers. This is a kind of humble brag. It's this kind of a confession, this admission that, I'm a bad boy. But at the same time, it's also this kind of associating of yourself with the people who carried out the slaughter. So what you're really saying is, I'm a paleface, and I'm real sorry that my fellow palefaces kicked the ass of your ancestors. But we are serious ass kicking machines. That's just the way we are. But I'm real sorry. It's humble brag. Okay, it's totally insincere BS. Okay, because the person's getting off on both emotions. Okay, so who is this William Carlos Williams? Okay, here's the sainted bard, complete with crazy hair. I guess this comes with the package of being a bard, a poet, but he didn't even know it. Really? Well, what's the evidence of that? Well, let's check this baby out. Here's a fine specimen of the man's wordsmitheries. Say it. No ideas, but in things. Nothing but the blank faces of the houses, and cylindrical trees bent, forked by preconception and accident, split, furrowed, creased, mottle-stained, secret, into the body of the light. What does this crap mean? Actually, don't tell me. I don't want to know what it means. Anyway, so he Williams kept good company. Anyway, the guy who writes this kind of crap is the kind of guy who Stannard takes as a wholesome, man of character, a guy who sees things, who he penetrates through the shallow superficialities of life, and he sees right into the profound underbelly or whatever, right? So who does he hang out with? He hangs out with people such as Ezra Pound, as in... Sorry, I found it. Although his primary occupation was as a family doctor, Williams had a successful literary career as a poet, obviously. In addition to poetry, his main literary focus, he occasionally wrote short stories, plays, novels, essays, and translations. He practiced medicine by day, and he wrote by night. Early in his career, he briefly became involved in the Imagist movement through his friendships with Pound. Pound refers to Ezra Pound. Ring a bell? It should. It does for me anyway. Let's check him out. Okay, here we have Ezra Pound. Yeah, forgive me for like bouncing around. I just, I just like connecting dots. And besides, I know the name. Here's Ezra, another poet, another crazy hairstyle. The badge of being a poet. Okay, right? Need the hair like Samson. Without the hair, you can't knock down buildings. Without the hair, you can't, bang out a couplet. So, what's interesting about Pound? Well, he's just another one of these, hate America first bozos. He's one of the early versions. He was basically the Tokyo Rose with a beard for Italy. He was, during the Second World War, he was the fascist mouthpiece. They needed somebody who could speak English and who could hopefully subvert the Allied forces. And he was the man. What a character. Anyway, he was captured at the end of the war. There's a section here on him somewhere where he's looking. Where are we? Wow, this is huge. Oh, here we go. Here's him captured at the end of the war, looking happy. What? You mean it didn't work out the way you wanted it? Mussolini's dead. What happens to you now, buddy? Well, fortunately, he had friends in high places. What's his name? The guy that wrote The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway, got to Allied forces and got Ezra Pound to pretend to be a lunatic, and so he sat in his hospital bed and asked if he could negotiate on behalf of America with Japan, and said all kinds of other crazy stuff, and basically got himself off. They presumed he was a nut, or at least they had the excuse publicly that they could say he was a nut, and so they could let him go. But again, the point is, these are the kind of hate America firsters that Stannard is associating with. So, and to make my point, let's take a quick look at the prologue here. In the darkness of an early July morning in 1945, on a desolate spot in the New Mexico desert, named after a John Donne sonnet celebrating the Holy Trinity, the first atomic bomb was exploded. J. Robert Oppenheimer later remembered that the flash of light, followed by the thunderous roar, caused a few observers to laugh and others to cry. But most, he said, were silent. Oppenheimer himself recalled at that instant a line from the Bhagavad Gita. Let's let Oppie himself read his lines.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu.
Oh, come on already. We'll get on with it. Jesus.
Is trying to persuade.
Sorry, I'll play it again. I'm so impatient with this nonsense.
Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
All right. Okay, so let's, in case you don't know much about Oppie, Oppie is this guy here, J. Robert Oppenheimer, an American theoretical physicist and professor of physics at University of California, Berkeley. He was the wartime head of the Los Alamos Laboratory, and is among those who are credited with being the father of the atomic bomb during the Second World War, excuse me. What else do we know about Oppenheimer? Well, this is telling and has to do with Stannard, I'm sure. Many of Oppenheimer's closest associates were active in the Communist Party in the 1930s and 1940s. So what is he actually, whimpering about? What's he so sad about? Is he sad about the fact that we have an atomic age where you can actually blow the smithereens out of each other in a massive way using this new technology? Or is he actually sad that his commie friends over in the Soviet Union don't have an atom bomb, and they're going to be at a disadvantage when they're trying to expand communism across the rest of the world, right? And the United States is going to have the upper hand. I mean, where does this guy's loyalties, or do this guy's loyalties lay? Again, many of his closest associates were active in the Communist Party in the 1930s and 1940s. They included his brother Frank, Frank's wife Jackie, Kitty, Jean Tatlock, which is a woman he was involved with, his landlady Mary Ellen Washburn, and several of his graduate students at Berkeley. When he joined the Manhattan Project in 1942, Oppenheimer wrote on his personal security questionnaire that he had been a member of just about every Communist Front organization on the West Coast. Years later, he claimed that he did not remember saying this. What? That it was not true. No way, man. It's upset up. And that if he did say anything along those lines, well, I mean, it was a half-jocular overstatement. Just kidding. He was a subscriber to the People's World, a Communist Party organ, and he testified in 1954 that I was associated with the communist movement. From 1937 to 1942, Oppenheimer was a member at Berkeley of what he called a discussion group, which was later identified by fellow members Haakon Chevalier and Gordon Griffiths as a closed, i.e. secret unit of the Communist Party for Berkeley. Faculty. Yeah, thanks, Oppie. Okay, let's keep going here. So keep in mind that Oppie has just said that he's talking about the explosion of the atom bomb. I am become death, the shatterer of worlds. And then Stannard relates this to what happened in the Americas. There is no reason to think that anyone on board the Nina, the Pinta, or the Santa Maria, on an equally dark early morning 4.5 centuries earlier, thought of those ominous lines from the ancient Sanskrit poem, when the crews of the Spanish ships spied a flicker of light on the windward side of the island they would name after the Holy Savior. But the intuition, had it occurred, would have been as appropriate then as it was when that first nuclear blast rocked the New Mexico desert sands. Okay, so Stannard's got a problem with Columbus, but who he's really got a problem with is Cortez, the conqueror of Mexico. Here's where it gets interesting, because Stannard likes to quote the conquistadors when it pleases him, but when they report items that he doesn't like, it's like, oh, no way, man, they're just making this shit up, man, they're just racists, as I'll show you. Okay, and here, for example, we've got chronicler, the conquistador Bernardo Diaz del Castillo. He's talking about the visit to a provincial city, and he says, when we entered the city of Iztapalapa, the appearance of the palaces in which they housed us, how spacious and well built they were, of beautiful stonework and cedar wood, and the wood of other sweet-scented trees, with great rooms and courts, wonderful to behold, covered with awnings of cotton cloth. When we had looked well at all of this, we went to the orchard and garden, which was such a wonderful thing to see and walk in, that I was never tired of looking at the diversity of the trees and noting the scent which each one had, and the paths full of roses and flowers, and the native fruit trees and native roses, and the pond of fresh water. And all was cemented and very splendid, with many kinds of stone monuments, with pictures on them, which gave me much to think about. Then the birds of many kinds and breeds which came into the pond. I say again that I stood looking at it, and thought that never in the world would there be discovered lands such as these. And when it came to the capital city, for example, you have, again, Bernal Diaz writing, we beheld on that great lake a great multitude of canoes, some coming with supplies of food and others returning with cargoes of merchandise. And we saw that from every house of that great city, and of all the other cities that were built in the water, it was impossible to pass from house to house, except by drawbridges which were made of wood or in canoes. And we saw in those cities temples and oratories like towers and fortresses, and all gleaming white, and it was a wonderful thing to behold. At the risk of beating a dead horse, I'll keep going just a little bit more. This time it's Cortez who wrote, all of these houses have very large and very good rooms, and also very pleasant gardens, of various sorts of flowers, both on the upper and lower floors. And next comes Stannard. The many streets and boulevards of the city were so neat and well swept, despite its multitude of inhabitants, that the first Europeans to visit never tired of remarking on the city's cleanliness and order. And then, quote, there were even officials in charge of sweeping, recalled one odd observer. In fact, at least 1,000 public workers were employed to maintain the city streets and keep them clean and watered. Okay, so far so good. But what happens when we look into, because we all know what the Aztecs are famous for, right? Cannibalism, right? So let's do a text search here for cannibal and see what we find. Okay. Violence, of course. Violence, of course, was everywhere, as alluded to above, but occasionally it took on an especially perverse character. In addition to the hunting down and burning of witches, witches? Are we talking about the Aztecs here? Which was an everyday affair in most locales. In Milan, that sounds like Italy. In 1476, a man was torn to pieces by an enraged mob, and his dismembered limbs were then eaten by his tormentors. Okay, so in Italy they're eating dudes. In Paris and Lyon, Huguenots were killed and butchered, and their various body parts were sold openly in the streets. Other eruptions of bizarre torture, murder, and ritual cannibalism were not uncommon. Such behavior, nonetheless, was not officially condoned, at least not usually. Okay, let's go on to the next entry. Numerous modern scholars have dissected and analyzed the effects of both biblical and classical myth on the minds of Europeans during this so-called age of discovery. But at least as strong as all the mixed-up imaginings of terrestrial heavens and Elysian fields, of lusty maidens and cannibalistic human feasts, was a fervent, and in many cases a truly maniacal European craving. Truly maniacal European craving for raw power and the wealth of gold and silver. There's another section right down on the page I can't ignore. It goes as such. So it went from island to island, small and large, throughout the Caribbean. Wherever he went, Columbus planted a cross, making, as he said, the declarations that are required, and claiming ownership of the land for his royal patrons back in Spain. Despite the fact that Columbus noted in his own journal of the voyage that the people of these lands do not understand me nor I them, it seems to have been a particular satisfaction to him that never once did any of the onlooking Arawak-speaking islanders object to his repeated proclamations in Spanish that he was taking control of the lands away from them. Ludicrous though this scene may appear to us in retrospect, at the time it was a deadly serious ritual. Okay, so what's wrong with that? I can give you my own explanation, but Wikipedia's already got something right here. So let's just take a look at that. He's talking about the Arawak-speaking islanders. Okay, the Arawaks basically next door to the Caribs. Okay, and the only reason that they were still alive was because the Caribs had yet to invade. How the Caribs, I'm sure, would have done so sooner or later, and had they done so, the Arawaks would have been exterminated. What the Caribs generally did was they mounted up their war canoes, invaded, killed off all the men, retained the children, turned the women into sex slaves, and completely absorbed the original people, and basically genocided them out because everything of their original culture and identity and everything else was just eliminated. But you can see for yourself here in Wikipedia. In the early colonial period, the Caribs had a reputation as warriors who raided neighboring islands. According to the Spanish conquistadors, the Carib Indians were cannibals who regularly ate roasted human flesh. That's the claim, which is then followed by, there is evidence as to the taking of human trophies and the ritual cannibalism of war captives among both Carib and other Amerindian groups such as the Arawak and the Tupinamba. So even the Arawaks apparently took human trophies and were into ritual cannibalism of war captives. Right? Stannard would have you believe there that the Amerindians are all a bunch of saints. They can't do anything wrong. They don't even know what violence is, right? I mean, can you imagine having something like an Aztec empire which doesn't have violence? I mean, how do you have an empire without violence? I mean, come on, the whole thing is absurd. Anyway, over the 2 centuries leading up to Christopher Columbus' arrival in the Caribbean archipelago in 1492, the Caribs mostly displaced the more Purian-speaking Tainos by warfare, extermination, and assimilation. Yeah, genociding them out. The Taino has settled the island chains earlier in history, migrating from the mainland. Okay. The Caribs were skilled boat builders and sailors. They appeared to have owed their dominance in the Caribbean basin to the mastery of warfare. Exactly, and that's basically the lesson of history. You better be very adept at warfare, otherwise you're not going to survive. It's pointless saying that claiming that the Arawaks were wiped out by Columbus or whoever else, or whether it was them or the Caribs or whoever else, because they were nice. And if only everybody else was nice too, nothing bad would have happened. And the onus is upon the rest of the world to be nice. I'm afraid that's not the way it works. It's exactly the opposite. The onus is upon your civilization to prepare for the worst case scenario. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. You get the same thing in China where people are like, the British defeated us in the Opium War. Yeah, because your military wasn't prepared, right? I mean, the Opium Wars were not won by Britain; they were lost by China. I mean, I've written a whole book on this. Anyway, okay, let's continue. This is interesting too. The question arose in Columbus' time whether Indians could be enslaved, and Queen Isabel had ruled against it. So in other words, the initial, what do you call it, view of the Caribbean Indians was not, okay, these are people that we can dominate and enslave and whatever. And it was quite the opposite. Queen Isabel ruled against slavery. So the idea that the English have this, this truly maniacal European craving for raw power, it's just complete rubbish. It's just complete, it's a complete misreading and it's willful and deliberate, I'm sure, on Stannard's part. I would have to guess. I don't know, but I mean, you can't be an expert on this kind of thing and not know these things. I mean, even I know these things, and I'm no expert. I knew this kind of thing before I started looking this up. Anyway, so Queen Isabel ruled against enslaving Indians. At about the same time, however, the Ojeda, Bastidas, and other explorers voyaging along the Spanish Main had been attacked by Indians with poisoned arrows. All such Indians were considered Caribs, which took a considerable toll of Spanish lives. These attacks and the evidence of some of the perpetrators, at least, were cannibals, provided the rationale for the decree authorizing the enslavement of Caribs. So, in other words, initially, had the Caribs just been nice guys, so to speak, there would not have been an authorization for slavery. But because the Caribs attacked Spanish and presumably ate some of them, then the decree to enslave Caribs came from the Queen. On 3rd June 1511, King Ferdinand declared war on the Caribs, and the rest is history. Island Caribs, nevertheless, mostly succeeded in keeping their islands unoccupied by Spaniards. And this is the kind of what you see in East Asia as well, right? Who was free of occupation in East Asia, in Northeast Asia anyway? The Japanese. Why? Because they were the most militaristic, right? They were always ready to go to war. They were always ready to defend themselves and willing to fight to the death to do so. And they were well organized, and and they kept up their martial arts. That's just the way it works. And if you decide to go soft, then you're gonna have to suffer the consequences. I don't make the rules, but it behooves us as adults to observe them, to understand them, right? So that we can benefit from them. By benefit, I mean we can protect ourselves and not to go warring against everyone else. Okay, so let's get to the heart of my issue here, my problem with Stannard. Let's check this out. What he writes. In fact, there was no real evidence of cannibalism anywhere in the Indies. What? Despite widespread popular belief to the contrary, that continues to exist today. Rubbish. It didn't exist when you wrote this either. A belief largely based on the fact that Columbus said the alleged man-eaters were called Caribs. Through Spanish and English linguistic corruption, that name evolved into cannibal. And although both the more level-headed of Columbia's contemporaries and the consensus of modern scholarship have strenuously contradicted the charge, what? It has stuck as a truism in the Western imagination. The important point here, however, is not the spuriousness of the claim that some of the natives ate human flesh, but only that Columbus and those who heard his report readily believed, indeed needed to believe, that the charge was true. Right? If no dog-headed people had yet actually been seen, or races without heads and with faces in their chests, or one-legged folk, or cyclopes, or other bizarre semi-human beasts, he's talking about the various bogus stories that earlier travelers had made regarding peoples they'd encountered overseas. And he's saying that the idea of cannibals is invented in the same vein, that you have to invent some sort of fabulous lunatic version of humanity, or some quasi-human species, whatever else. As this will be entertaining to people back at home, and will prove that you prove your valor as an explorer and all the rest of it. And so he said that he's saying that they invented the whole idea of cannibals to make it sound like the Caribbean was super dangerous, when actually it was super safe. So hence, but for the time, being rumors of some cannibals would do. As for the terrestrial paradise Columbus knew to exist, he found it. All right. So Central, North, South America, terrestrial paradise. Get it? And so what is Stannard refusing to believe? Because he takes, verbatim, he seems to swallow hook, line, and sinker the conquistadors' claims that Mexico City was this paradise. But as soon as they talk about the following, when they say anything negative, all of a sudden, that's racist, or they're just making it up because it's just, it's hyperbolic, kind of like, it's like claiming that people encountered, what was it, cyclops, one-legged people with faces in their chests, dog-headed people, and all the rest of that kind of nonsense. Okay, here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is from Fray Diego Duran, who's describing the Tzompantli, which I'll show you in a second. First, a little bit of a description. Let's see. From pole to pole, through the hole, stretched thin rods strung with numerous human heads pierced through the temple being here. Each rod held 20 heads. These horizontal rows of skulls rose to the height of the poles of the palisade and filled it from end to end. One of the conquerors assured me that they were so numerous that they were impossible to count, so close together that they caused fright and wonder. These skulls were all that remained of those who had been sacrificed. After the latter were dead and their flesh had been eaten, the skulls were delivered to the ministers of the temple, who strung them there. So what is a Tzompantli? Here at Wikipedia, we have a Tzompantli, or skull rack, is a type of wooden rack or palisade documented in several Mesoamerican civilizations, which was used for the public display of human skulls, typically those of war captives or other sacrificial victims. It is a scaffold-like construction of poles, blah, 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 blah. You can see one here. There you go, looking good, baby. Right, and we can see another one here. Chichen Itza. This is let me get this close up here. Uh-oh, that's kind of downloading kind of slow. Let's hold on here. Come on, baby. Help me out. Help a brother out. And we shall... There we go. Ooh, that's pretty close up. But these are all shapes of human skulls. You can kind of barely see it. See the face, see the eye, the mouth, the eye, etc., etc. This being a depiction in stone of human heads. You can see them more here, that kind of thing. Here's another depiction, and this is from, I guess, Juan de Tovar's 1587 manuscript known as the Ramirez Codex. Animals eating animals, skull racks, blah, 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 blah. And anyway, human sacrifice on a large scale was introduced to the Maya by the Toltecs from the appearances of the Tzompantli by the Chichen Itza ball courts. 6 ball court reliefs at Chichen Itza depict the decapitation of a ball player. It seems that the losers would be beheaded and would have their skulls placed on the Tzompantli. Excellent. Continuing. Excavations at Templo Mayor in the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, have revealed many skulls belonging to women and children, in addition to those of men, a demonstration of the diversity of the human sacrifices in Aztec culture. Diversity, that would be used that way. After displaying severed heads, many scholars have determined that the limbs of Aztec victims would be cannibalized. Fray Diego Duran confirms this, stating that the skulls were delivered to the temples after the flesh had been eaten. The Hue Tzompantli was the central Tzompantli found in Tenochtitlan. That's the Mexico City. That's the magnificent city with the gardens and the canoes and everything that Cortez was describing. The skull rack here served as a reminder of the Aztecs' ongoing flowery wars, which we'll look at in a second. An important aspect of Aztec warfare was the capture of enemy warriors to serve as sacrificial victims, which is evident from the number of warriors found sacrificed around Aztec structures. One conquistador, Andre de Tapia, was given the task of counting the skulls on the Tzompantli at Tenochtitlan, that's Mexico City, and estimated that there were 136,000 skulls on it. Right? I said I was going to get into the flower wars, but I'll do that in another video because this one's going on too long as it is. Anyway, I'll just end it with this then, basically. If we're going to get, again, cannibalism is everywhere. I'll do that. I'll show that in a later video. But it's everywhere. It's in China. It's in with Amerindians. It's in Polynesia. It's in Africa. It's in Europe. It's everywhere. And again, if we're going to, this is another thing which is a lot of people don't really realize. A lot of Indians actually were slave owners. In fact, probably most of them, most of the tribes owned slaves everywhere through North America, Central America, South America. And you can find books on this kind of thing. For example, this is one here, Slavery in the Cherokee Nation, The Kiowa Society and the Defining of a People, 1855, 1867. Here's another one, Black Slaves, Indian Masters, Slavery, Emancipation, and Citizenship in the Native American South. This book is 2013. The previous one was 2003. Slavery in the United States was supposed to be wiped out in 1864, but actually the Cherokee Indian Nation kept holding on to its slaves right through to 1865, which then forced the hand of the U.S. government, which then had to march in the cavalry in 1865 into the Cherokee lands to free their slaves. Not to mention the fact that actually Indian slavery, Amerindian slavery, continued right down to the Great Depression. There were still slaves in the South, or I should say tribes in the Southwest that were raiding each other for slaves down to the 1920s, maybe even I think the 1930s. Anyway, okay, I just thought I'd do a kind of a counterblast to David Stannard's notion that the Indians did not participate in cannibalism, and only the Europeans did, because he wants to basically project everything good on the Amerindians and everything bad on the Europeans, which is a very kind of melodrama way of looking at things. Snidely Whiplash twirling his mustache versus the virgin he places on the train tracks who could never possibly commit any sin. It's a really childish way of looking at things, and people who look at it without kind of recoiling, wondering, hey, what's going on? How can it be that the Amerindians don't really seem to do anything wrong, and only the Europeans, no matter what they do, is just devilish. This obviously is nutty, and obviously is there to serve a purpose. I won't get into in this particular video whether I think he was a Marxist/communist, although I certainly suspect it. People like this they don't let the facts get in the way of the truth. That's the motto of a famous Canadian writer. And Farley Mowat, he denied he said it, but a reporter said he certainly did. And this is just how these clowns work. They'll tell any lie to anybody at any time to get what they want. I'm not saying the Stannard is necessarily lying, but it's hard not to think he's up to something devious when he writes like this. Okay, I'll wrap it up. And thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.